Hi, this is Jan from Sleeping Baby Productions. I'm going to show you how I do Karen Hoppy's Eastie shoulder. This is one that she invented probably 7 or 8 years ago now. She's no longer making slings to sell, but she's licensed the design to me to sell them. So if you're using this to make a sling for yourself, that's fine, but this is not to be used for making slings to sell. So I've cut the wrap to the length that I want it. I actually make a little snip with my scissors, take one of these weft threads and pull it out. You do a couple of those and you get a nice clear line. You can kind of see the white there. I just cut along the white after I've pulled that weft thread. Makes a nice straight line, which is a good place to start. So to do the pleats, I'm going to fold this one up, the edge of the wrap about 2 inches. And you can see where I'm kind of pinching the fabric there. Fold it back. And then I pin right at that cut edge. And again, about 9 inches down. And then the second one is pretty much the same. I'm going to grab about 3.5 or 4 inches from that first pleat and then pin that one down too. And you notice I make these pretty closely spaced. You can do them wider if you want, but the wider this portion is, the more it's going to make the shoulder really wide, and if it's too wide, you're not going to be able to scrunch this up enough, and it's going to be just really, really wide on your shoulder, which can restrict your arm movement. It's not so comfortable. And you see underneath, the flip side looks very similar. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on this end. About 2 inches down. Pinch it and flip it back up. Pin. And then again, 9 inches from the end. I find it very helpful to have a cutting mat right on my sewing table. That way I'm not running back and forth to an ironing board or something to do my measuring. You can also, just like put a piece of tape and mark inches on it or whatever if you don't have a cutting board. So doing the same thing here. I pulled it up about 4 inches and then I'm pinning it in place. And then for the basting stitches, pivot to the machine. I've got this on a very long stitch. On my machine, it's centered, so 3.5, and then the stitch length is 5. That's probably going to vary from machine to machine. You want the longest stitch that it offers, whatever number that happens to be. And I don't know if you watched the pleated sling video. I do sew over my pins. Technically you're not supposed to because the needle can come down right in the middle of the pin. Breaks the pin, usually breaks the needle. It can cause some burrs in the machine. So if you're not confident in your machine, don't do that. I don't know if you also saw, this is the normal tension, about a 4. I put it down to 1.5 or 2. That makes the basting stitch easier to take out. So many wraps have an obvious weft line that goes down. If it doesn't, what I'm doing is I'm holding the other end here kind of taut. That way I'm making a straight line that I'm sewing down here. And you can kind of feel with your fingers, make sure that the pleat is staying down and flat and not kind of folded back under like that. And then make sure you turn your tension back to normal after you've done that line. And then I'm just going to do this one up here. You'll notice I'm not cutting the threads. My machine has a built-in cutter. Obviously, if yours doesn't, then you're going to want to cut those in between seams. Next, because I'm making this to sell, I need to write a tag because all baby carriers are legally required by the CPSIA to have some kind of tracking data available. You shouldn't be using this method to sell, but if you are selling slings using another method, it's got to have some kind of tracking tag. And of course, I neglected to grab my ring, so I'm going to do that now. When I'm sewing 20 slings a day, that's my exercise, getting up to run and grab the rings every time I sew a sling. So I'm bringing the rings onto it. I'm just going to fold the fabric over. Now you can just zigzag along this edge. This is my backup machine. It doesn't do very well on a single layer if I'm doing a zigzag, so I'm going to fold under instead. Now I'm pinching a little bit less than 1/2 inch here. I'm just going to hold that in place on this edge. And I'm doing a stitch on my machine that has an automatic back tack. If your machine does not have an automatic back tack, you're going to have to remember to reverse the stitch when you're sewing the ends. That keeps the thread, the seam in place. So there's back tack. And this is for a left shoulder user, so I'm going to make sure the tag is on the right side, that way the tag isn't up on their neck. Obviously, again, not something that you have to worry about if you're not sewing it for sale, which you shouldn't be. So it's just one of the things that I think about when I'm doing these for customers. You can see I'm just folding as I go. If you wanted to, you could baste in this fold. I've done this so many times I don't really need to do that. And again, I'm sewing right up against this basting stitch so that I get a nice straight line going across. And that's where having the straight line cut helps a lot, because, you know, the straighter your lines are to start with, the nicer it's going to be when you finish. Go ahead and, you know, take your time. Nothing about this has to be rushed unless you're sewing 20 slings a day. And there's that back tack again. And then again, because I use that basting stitch with the low tension, this will just come right out. If you don't lower the tension, you're gonna have to sit there with the stitch ripper for a little while. I just find this much easier. So I'm gonna do 3 rows of stitching total. To keep this looking nice and neat, I'm just gonna make sure that sort of tapers toward the ring. Make sure it's about the same on the other side. They're probably not going to reverse this, but you know, if they do, it'll still look nice. And then I'm going to sew this a little bit more than ½ an inch, maybe like 3/4 of an inch from the first line of stitching. This is where you really want to take your time, because otherwise it gets kind of lumpy. And this is the same thing that you'd be doing on a gathered sling. Just kind of stop every once in a while, make sure your fabric is nice and straight and that it's not bumpy underneath. Again, there's that back tack. And you can do a number of different things when you're finishing this section. What I like to do is a third line of stitching closer to this one than it is to this one. I think it's just a nice design element. On my pleated slings, I'll do a decorative stitch. However, the denser the stitching is on a gathered shoulder and a hybrid pleated gathered shoulder like this, the less you're going to be able to scrunch it up. So if you had a really dense decorative stitch going down here, it's going to be harder to wear it, which is why I don't do it on the Eastie shoulder slings. If you feel like you're going to want a really wide shoulder, you could do the deco stitch. It's not something that I do though. So there's our 3 lines of stitching. You can see I kind of use this first one as a guide for sewing the second so that it's consistent all the way across. Then clip those threads. Watch when you're clipping, because you can catch the fabric and that's no good. I do find that customers, if I don't clip the threads really close, they'll try to pull them and then they're pulling the stitching out, and of course that's no good. So there is the finished shoulder, and you can see it scrunches up pretty nicely here. You can have it as narrow as you want, or you know, wider if you wanted it. I've seen people kind of fold this to get the width that they like. There's a number of different ways to wear this, of course, but that's the Eastie shoulder. Thanks for watching.